Welcome to the DevReady podcast, where we're helping non-techs build great tech. Today, we're joined by Evan, who has a big backlog of industry experience in a number of spaces, both technical, authoring a number of books in terms of innovation tools, why data science projects fail. He's currently the manager and director of Ubity. Evan, thank you for joining us. There's plenty to discuss, but we'll dig in slowly and unpack your career and what's been in technical and also in delivering technical solutions or products into commercialization. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew. It's fantastic to join you today.
First, I'd like to go to your background, how you ended up in the tech space and what drew you to this ecosystem of technology. I know you've been in the world of startups too, back in the day, supporting with a bit more high-tech technology, but talk a bit about your background in it.
Yeah, look, Andrew, my background actually began a long, long time ago in this space, and it began through probably the one thing that scares most people off, mathematics. So I still remember in grade two, where the maths teacher gave me this test, and the whole class, not just me, but gave the whole class this test to do, and it was a speed test. You had to do it as quickly as possible. And I remember something in me, there was probably something competitive that wanted me to do it first. And so we got all the test rules sitting at our little wooden desk, our little pencils ready to go, not an iPad or anything like that. And the teacher said, go. And so I was racing down the questions, doing them all as quick as I can. And for some reason, I managed to, I think, finish this test first. And I ran up the front and handed it in and said, I'm done. And I think I got a reasonable result from there. And I think that kind of little test at that point in my life changed the direction of kind of what I was interested in. And then from then onwards, I developed this kind of interest for mathematics and the kind of the hard sciences, things that maths underpin. And so it was natural for me when I went to university in Queensland. I went to the University of Queensland to study a dual degree with a single major in maths and a double major in maths in the 2 degrees. And then from there, going on to doing a PhD in applied mathematics in game theory in Germany. So I left Australia at that point and went overseas and picked up my degree over there, and then actually moved up to Sweden after that to work in the robotics industry, programming robots and things like that in the automotive production lines. At which point, after 6 years of enjoying the cold, I decided I needed a bit of warm weather. I needed to warm up again, and came back to Melbourne
All
for
right, a little bit.
yeah, exactly. But I think the mistake was I came back to Melbourne thinking it's like
Oh,
Brisbane.
no, no, wrong place.
Definitely. So came back to Melbourne and I actually brought my wife with me, and she didn't know any better. She didn't know like what how the differences in temperature and weather around Australia. So she came back with me to Melbourne. We're there for 4 years. Got heavily involved in the startup space, especially leaning on the technical knowledge that I'd learned overseas and all the programming in C++ plus plus and all the other things, and really just working in that space. But having one foot on the commercial side as well, and starting to explore like how do we commercialize some of these technologies. And after about 4 years in Melbourne, I moved up to Brisbane, to which point my wife realized instead of 9 months of cool and rainy weather, you can have 9 months of warm and sunny weather,
Yeah.
and asked me
And the
what
other
were we
other
thinking.
3 months are still okay.
Yeah, they're not too bad.
Yeah,
They're a little bit
yeah,
hot and a little bit cool. That's it.
yeah, yeah. That's brilliant. So you've done quite well getting out of Melbourne, and I think you said it pre-COVID off the call. So yeah, your timing was
Yeah,
good.
I dodged it. I got out of there end of
Yeah,
2018, start of 2019, so pretty lucky.
brilliant. Game theory. Tell me a bit about that because it's something that people can sort of dig in a little bit in terms of learning, especially when you're building technology solutions. Tell us a bit about what that meant when you were studying that space and what that's meant for your career because it can impact.
Absolutely. Look, game theory is a fascinating area, absolutely fascinating. Whenever I tell people that I've got a PhD in game theory, you can see people's eyes light up. It's like, wow, I remember that. That was the most exciting thing I studied in economics and stuff like that. But from my perspective, there's two elements of game theory. So I got into it because of a proof that Lloyd Shapley did of the Shapley value. And he showed that it's this unique value that fulfills these four axioms. And the proof he did was just genius. It was insane. When you read the proof, it's like, how did he ever come up with that? It's almost like looking at a work of art in some national art museum, and you go, how did that person come up with that idea to paint that? It's the same as that in proofs, and you'll hear it from a lot of mathematicians that will describe the beauty of proofs, where just people come up with these genius steps that you don't know where it came from.
Mm.
And so that was kind of what got me into it. And then while studying game theory, the reason why I kind of moved away from it into programming was because game theory is a great theoretical concept to explore and understand. Practically, it's rarely used. So
Okay.
in the non-cooperative game theory space, which is an area that I didn't study, I did the cooperative. There are a few applications that exist, but it's not the way humans behave, and we've shown it over and over again. In fact, I teach a fourth year course at the University of Queensland, the bachelor in the BSAN, so business analytics strategy course. And there's a lecture I give on game theory, and I talk to the students. Okay, here's how you can actually apply this in real life, and it's not taking the mathematics and the equilibria and the different solution concepts. It's using the framework to recognize a situation from a game theory perspective, and then know, hey, I've seen this situation before. Here's how I use it. So that's kind of where I see game theory playing a role in the practical world of applications.
In that practical example, can you dive in a little bit on the practical example that you give off in a uni course?
Yeah, absolutely. So one example that I do in the university course is I talk about a set of organizations competing against each other, for example, in the petrol pricing space. And I say, look, what are the aspects of this game that you recognize that would help you define a pricing strategy? And so we sit down and we go, okay, so we can see the other competitors' prices, so that information's available. We can know their strategies, so we know the strategies that exist in the game. We've got a vague idea of the payoffs, the utility to each player within that game. And so based on this kind of information, we can say, okay, what kind of strategies would make sense? We're not going to compute a Nash equilibrium. We're not going to do these kind of things, but we can do some basic stuff and talk about dominated strategies and dominant strategies and look at, okay, what are the obvious things you wouldn't do and the things that you would do? And so we kind of unpack at that high level, what are the aspects of this game that we can get a toehold to define a strategy for our pricing as an organization.
It's a fascinating space in terms of how you might actually use the theory itself. But yeah, in terms of the startup world, you mentioned offline that you've built some startup products, open source some stuff. Let's start to unpack that a little bit in terms of how you ended up in startup, because you mentioned a little bit off call that it's more solution focused where you began, and then it sort of come from a customer's perspective as you learned through your career. Where did it all begin in terms of startups for you?
So startups for me really began, I would say the genesis is in Sweden, when I was living in Sweden. And Sweden, I was working for an applied research organization like CSIRO, like Australia CSIRO, but I was working for the Fraunhofer Chalmers Center. And while I was there, it's very much a, a well-planned, well-run organization where we have our research projects, we have our clients, we roll those tools out and they get value out of them. And so the pace of it was very enjoyable. It suited me perfectly. I had three children in Sweden with my wife, and it was great for a small family, and because the pace was suitable for that. At some point, I went, okay, like I want to start commercializing some of these things that didn't fit the set suite of tools that we built in Sweden. And the first one of that was a printable keyboard. So it was a keyboard that you could print out on a sheet of paper. It used an AR marker, an augmented reality marker, and it combined a depth sensor in what Intel released as their RealSense camera to be able to print out a keyboard on a sheet of paper, and you could use it anywhere in space. So you could move it around and you didn't just have to put it on a table. And the thinking was, and the reason why I did this was back in Sweden, I had a Swedish keyboard and it annoyed me because the keys are different to an Australian keyboard. And so what I want to do, this was a solution to that. I can just print out any keyboard on the planet and I can just use it wherever I am. And I could even do it on a plane if I don't have space for a keyboard. I got the sheet of paper, I unfold it, put it on a book, and I'm ready to go. And so it really began there. Hey, can I turn this into a real product? Can I make this something? Now, unfortunately, the quality of the product itself, the Intel RealSense, wasn't quite good enough to get a really good user experience that people would enjoy. And the problem that I was solving probably wasn't enough to justify people using something that was substandard in terms of its user experience. But that really got me started. I kind of was like, okay, this was fun, building my own thing and developing my own technology. What can I do? And that happened to be the point in time when I was moving to Australia. And so I had a few different ideas that I wanted to try out that I'd come up with over time. None of those, unfortunately, worked, but also had a few friends that approached me and said, hey, we've got these kind of startups we want to do. And there's about four of them. And so I was kind of working in each of them and assisting them until one of them took off and then became kind of almost a full-time job where I kind of helped them grow the business about four times from where we were to where it got to.
It's an interesting, fascinating space, the world of startups. You sometimes need to have multiple going on around you. And that might lead into your book a little bit, which was innovation tools and how you might test multiple things. You sort of did that in practical terms just then, while you were working on multiple startups at once. Tell us a bit about that book and where that stemmed from.
Yeah, so that book also kicked off at the same time I was building that product, that printable keyboard. And it was written over 2014, 2015, and launched in 2016. So usually what I say with books is it's about 2.5 years of elapsed time for a person. So with my recent book, Why Data Science Project Failed, that was roughly half that because there were two of us writing. But each of the books that I've done somehow have taken 2.5 years. It's been kind of the rule of thumb. And that's probably because I haven't worked full time on them. It's always been a part of something else that's going on.
Piecemeal doing it around everything else here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Innovations Tool, really the concept behind it when it was launched was back when I was in Sweden and the work we were doing, when we were innovating, we'd see that a key to that was really finding the cheapest and lowest risk way possible to be able to carry out innovations. And what I saw as the key to that was really a set of tools and new technologies that had arisen in the last 5 to 10 years before that book was written. Now the book is quite old. It's almost 10 years old now. And so if you read it, some of the ideas in there are going to be pretty old and are no longer going to be cutting edge. But back then,
Relevant at the moment.
yeah, back then when the book was being written, it was really this is what we were seeing and what we were using to drive more innovation by reducing the risk of failure, which meant that you create this virtuous cycle via having more money left over to try more innovations because each failure was costing you less. You're able to get things out the door. And so it really explored that idea via a number of examples of tools and stories in that space and was really also scratching a bit of an itch for myself. Like I'd wanted to improve my writing. I'd wanted to do some writing. I'd already been doing a lot of blogs, really enjoyed it and thought, right, why don't I gather up some ideas
Why
that
don't
are
I
big.
write a book?
Yeah,
Let's do
exactly.
that
And do
then.
that.
Out of that book, if you'll take away just two or three concepts from that, what can you still take today if you're in the world of startup or in a business that needs to innovate? Effectively, we all need to. We can't stand still in this current environment. What are a couple of those key takeaways that you drove through the book?
Yeah, look, the main takeaways are really on that focusing on minimizing the effort to getting the feedback. So we know with the lean startup and books like that, the main concepts really kind of sit at the core of that for me. And I know not everyone agrees with my perspective, but for me, it's about a cycle time. So the lean startup really is minimizing cycle time to feed it back because there's so much
You're correct.
complexity and we don't know what we're doing. If you know what you're doing, that cycle time can go way out. You can be using waterfall. If you work in a utility, it's no longer the case, but let's say 20 years ago when it was all coal-fired power plants and it was just straightforward. If you worked in a utility, you did a 5, 10 year plan because you knew what was happening. But in a startup, you did a 2 day plan or a week plan or something like that to try and gather more information. And that was always a strategy. How do we get more information? And so we knew that was the case. But the question around this was, what are the specific tools that exist to make that possible? How do we realize that? We understand the theory, but what tools exist to be able to reduce that cycle time and to get really fast feedback? And so one of the main things from the book was really what are those sets of tools that I was seeing that could be useful to reduce that cycle time, to get it down
Right.
really low, to be able to drive innovation. Because as Thomas Edison said, innovation is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And it's about getting in as many cycles as you can. Allegedly, he tested 10,000 different types of filament types before he got one that finally worked. And so it's how do you give yourself that opportunity to do 10,000 different times? And so that was really the focus of the book. And really the final chapter then kind of explored if we can reduce that risk of failure or that cost of failure as well, both of those concepts down to a minimum, what does that lead to from an innovation perspective? How much more innovation can we do? And it kind of they're kind of two of the main ideas that I explore in the book.
And bringing it to probably to today's world a little bit, I know you would have had some tools that you represented in there, but today, if you're looking to do things fast and iterate on, you might start on a Figma wireframe to get feedback from. Then you might even go to bubble.io and produce a little app potentially as a feedback mechanism. There's many ways that we can drive this. If you're looking at AI, integrate with ChatGPT in some capacity, do some tests. There's different ways now probably than what you're talking about back then, but it's just keeping up to times with what's available in technology that you can iterate with potentially.
Yeah, exactly. And it depends on the use cases. And back then, the book was
Of
quite
course.
general, so it applied across
Mhm.
a wide variety of areas. It didn't have one specific area always in mind, although some of the tools were specific to some areas. But it was broad. And one of the challenges you've got, however, that also I've discovered in my career, especially in data science, is sometimes a minimum viable product can be the wrong way to begin. So I remember years ago, a colleague of mine.
Explain that, Gary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I remember years ago, a colleague of mine was working on this data science tool, right? And this data science tool was built to optimize their forward planning for their organization going forwards. It was a large organization, they're a multi-billion dollar company, and they wanted to better allocate resources and make strategic decisions. And so what they decided to do, because it was going to be a reasonably expensive project, is they wanted to build what you call in this space a minimum viable model. So not just a minimum viable product, but a minimum viable model
Interesting. Is
that
that
kind,
possible?
yeah, the kind of should
Yeah.
encapsulate the basics of what we want to do here. The problem
Okay.
was it doesn't work because,
Yeah, I don't think it would. You need big data, wouldn't you? Technically,
well,
yes.
no, not for this
Yeah.
project. You don't need big data
Okay.
because this
Right.
project as a planning one, it didn't need fine grain, lots of detail. It needed high level kind of what do we expect demand to be, what do we
Got
expect
it.
the constraints on production to be, what do we expect our workforce to look like. So it's not like IoT data or any streaming
Yeah.
data or click stream data or anything like that. It's not big data at all. And
Got it.
but the point is it's still an expensive undertaking because you've got to engage lots of stakeholders, you've got to elicit requirements, you've got to get a view of the future, you've got to understand their domain. And by the time you've started to do that, you've invested a lot of money and they want to be sure that will this thing work. So what you do is you try and build this minimum viable model that kind of encapsulates the main ideas and produces an output. The problem is that didn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is the outputs of the model don't look realistic enough. So the end user looks at it and goes, no, that's not possible. That can't
That's not
happen.
right.
You go, yeah, yeah, of course that can't happen. I know, but this is kind of the first step on the journey. And they go, well, no, it's wrong. And you go, well, but wait a second, work with me here. This is just the first
Mm.
step on the journey. They say, well, no, it's wrong. I can't work with you here. And so then you kind of stuck in this chicken and egg situation. In particular, this project was where the higher ups wouldn't justify more budget until the
Mm.
people lower down were saying,
It
look, this
actually got to
thing's
work.
realistic. And
Yeah,
they didn't have
understood.
enough budget to build something realistic because it was a very complex model
Yeah.
because they wanted to prove that there was value and they couldn't prove there was value because people couldn't justify it. And so it
So
doesn't
in the end,
always
they had to
work.
deliver the whole product to
Correct.
produce value. There was no
Correct.
value otherwise,
Correct.
which is it happens in technology, as any technology, where you've got a solution, and we talk to customers about minimum viable. Some customers are building end-to-end operating solutions, and if you don't have all the pieces, then it doesn't really deliver much value. Similar thing, if you can't get to an outcome that works, then there's no value. So there's really no minimum there. That's just you need to do the whole product, which becomes a waterfall type exercise.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, got it.
Absolutely.
One thing I want to unpack with you was you worked across multiple startups. Why did one work? Let's dig into that because there's what did you find that separated the one that worked out of the ones that didn't work so much? And what was the piece of learning that you got from that? Was it the you were willing to iterate, evolve fast? Was it just right time, right place? What can you distill from that?
Yeah. So from all the startups that I began in Australia, the problem I think with all the ones that failed was it was a technology solution looking for a problem. So,
Got it.
because of the very technical nature of my background, a PhD in applied maths game theory, 6 years of C++ coding, working in highly technical areas, I was very much of that mindset. Like I had all these
Got it.
technical ideas and I thought, aren't these things great? I was kind of enamored with my own ideas, I guess. And I wanted to test them. I wanted to get them out there. And there's a whole bunch of them. One was building an app. So we wanted to build a game. And in the game, what we would do is give the user choices for clothing. So they'd get to dress their avatars however they wanted to. And you'd get to give them options. And the idea of this game was to be able to leverage people's choices to predict fashion trends and to be able to, from a gaming perspective, because they'll dress their character how they really want to. So the right
Got it.
incentive should be there. And then you can take that data and that data can be used by Genes West or other big organizations to know what are kind of the things that are trending. They can test ideas on a game platform like that. So that was kind of one of the ideas amongst
Idea one.
many.
Yep.
And in all of them, I would say the majority failed because I would come to this industry with this technology solution. They're just like, we don't need that. We use SurveyMonkey. Why do we need this kind of thing, this
What?
expensive
Yeah.
app,
Okay.
and
This
build this
complex
thing up?
Your
Yeah,
component.
I,
3D
I,
modeling and rendering of clothing is not that simple.
yeah, exactly. And this is all
Uh,
a pain. And
uh,
then a couple other ones were from the commercial side. The technology was great, but the people who I was partnering with just commercially were making things too complicated. They wanted to be too tricky and grab and not share the benefits with investors, and they wanted to set up these complex structures and all this kind of stuff. And the company that really worked was just the most straightforward. It was in the digital marketing space. And it's a service
well, there you
people
go.
need. You just need this
Yeah.
service, right? And there's enough demand
Yeah.
for it that you can give it a shot. And we kind of had a few ideas around how we'd build some AI products. And I joined the team. There were a couple, so I joined a little bit after the founding, and there are a few people there, and kind of work with them to grow it. And because there's just simply demand for that, it's needed. It's not a, hey, here's this idea, will it work, will it won't. It's a known that it's
Mm.
needed. We're able to grow that business quite well.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier to go after a solution or an application or business that people need, and it's just yeah, you've got a lot of competition, very different market, but you're not trying to carve out a unicorn type business. I think a lot of people talk about that and how do we build a $1 billion business. Start by building a profitable one first, is my advice there. Because the reality is, if you can do that, you're on a good structure where you can actually manage cash flow, manage people, bring in customers, manage customer expectations, and you build good rigor around business rather than let's go build a $1 billion company and burn investor capital and chase money for the next 10 years. And
Yeah.
some people get lost into that little whirlwind of startup development, really.
You can. And one of the things that's really worth mentioning, so in my current company, I've had to raise capital twice.
Yep.
And I notice a big difference. So I spend a lot of time overseas. So most of not over 98% of the business we do in Ubity is from overseas. It's not doesn't come from Australia. And there's a huge difference in the appetite of investors and attitude of investors in Australia than in other countries. So Australian investors, when they look at you, they'll typically, not all of them, will want to see what's your profit margin, what's your EBITDA, how are you doing as a business, are you healthy?
You're a business.
You're a
Yeah.
business that can survive. Exactly to your point. Whereas in
Mm-hmm.
America, people who I know over there, and I don't have a lot of experience in the USA, it's more about growth. Do you have a truly disruptive idea? I don't care about profitability. I want to do something that's going to change a whole industry, and I
Is
don't
it growing?
care. And I don't care about anything else apart from growth. And can you blow this thing up? Don't show me your profitability because that's the wrong metric. And they'll back and put money behind those things. So if you're in Australia trying to do that kind of thing that you talked about that growth and not worrying about profitability, you will probably struggle here from an investor perspective. Whereas if
Yeah,
you're
very true.
you probably have to go to the States, so pick up your boat and pick up your house
Hmm.
and go overseas. Whereas if
Yeah,
you're wanting to do a
good advice
traditional,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you're wanting to do a traditional business like you said that you just want to get profitable, then you'll be fine here in Australia. There's no need to
Mm.
head overseas. You'll find investors. People will back you here.
Mm. That's good feedback in terms of it is difficult to raise capital here. We're around startups all the time, and then yes, investors want to see less risk in this country.
Yeah.
But yeah, jumping over to the US, even in parts of Asia, are a bit easier. Singapore's of the world where people are a bit more versed into jumping in a bit more high tech or high growth businesses. But it depends what type of business you're trying to achieve. I think you need to know that from the outset, what you're going after, because then that will what investors do you really need on the boat.
Exactly. And it's not necessarily one to say one methodology is better than the other. Like you could see potentially if investors lose faith in the American system, that it all gets gutted and no one's got any money and they're not being profitable and they all fall over and go bankrupt. Whereas the Australian businesses, because they're profitable, get to keep surviving. I read this thing the other day about the difference between European and American VCs, where European VCs are looking like Australians, that profitability, that well-run business, that safe bet, and
Yep,
American VCs just won't do it. If you've got a safe bet, they won't invest in you. They want the
not
uni-
interested. Yeah,
they want the big thing. And then they
yeah,
looked at what are the
yeah.
number of unicorns in the USA versus Europe. And I think they were able
Mm.
to point to one or two unicorns in Europe, whereas they were able to
Mhm.
point to dozens of unicorns in the USA because people are taking these big bets.
Yeah, they're having a go there. If you have more bets, you're going to have more wins. If you bet 1,000 times, you're going to get more wins than the person that bets 10. So that's the
Absolutely.
reality of this world. Yeah, got it. Your other book, let's talk a bit about that. So, why data science projects fail? It sort of wraps into why all projects slash technology product projects fail, but data science goes a little bit further in the world of there's a hype around AI. Clearly, it's everywhere. Everyone's a LinkedIn AI expert. It's fascinating what's going on that space, and what people are putting out there in the marketplace. But reality is they're supporting people in how to use ChatGPT. Most of these people. Data science is a different world completely. It's been around for a long time. It's a science where we've got a lot of mathematics going on, data sets, building actual models from the ground up. Talk to me about that book because when people really talk about that space, I don't think people understand what it actually means in terms of when you dig into real data science.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, this book was a passion project for sure, and it was written by the global director of analytics at Walmart, Doug Gray, and myself.
Okay.
So Doug, I was very fortunate to work with him on this project.
Not
He's
a
an
not a bad person to work with in context of a book, I would imagine. Gives it a bit of
absolutely.
gravitas.
And he's a luminary. And what I love about Doug is he's such a humble guy, and he's not out there, and he's not a well-known name, household name, because he's not out there promoting himself on LinkedIn all the time. He's building tools. He's responsible each year for hundreds of millions of dollars of cost avoidance at Walmart. He's already got $1 billion to his name there in 4 years' time working for them. So there's very few people globally that are like that. He's been part of teams that have won the Franz Edelman Awards in analytics, which is effectively the Nobel Prize for industrial analytics. He's done it twice. No one's done it twice, and he's got all these kind of recognition for the achievements he's had over his 35-year career. And as a part of the book, I guess both of us were facing some significant challenges in the data science space where we spend most of our time. And it was around incorrect expectations from executives. The expectations just getting ridiculous. It was just people wanted some AI. Give me some AI, as if you could just order it like a cake for a birthday
Yeah,
party.
just pick it up and give it to me. Yeah.
That's it. And we're just going to cut it and eat it and enjoy it. And it was just insane. And so we thought we've got to set some expectations. We've got to do something because book after book after book was coming out with these breathless expositions of these successful projects that have changed the world and everything's going to change and we're all AI first and we're this and that. And it was just frustrating. It was annoying. And so we just said we've got to do something to set some expectations. Otherwise, AI is going to suffer another AI winter like it's already had in the past. It's going to hit this point and people are just going to, this whole thing's overhyped. And so what we did is we kicked off on this project almost 2 years ago and basically, look, let's put something together. But first of all, let's do some research. Let's understand, first of all, why these projects fail. And very fortunately, both me and Doug are of a similar mindset. So he's an adjunct professor at Southern Methodist University, and I'm an adjunct at University of Queensland and QUT here up in Brisbane. And so we've got this very scientific approach to this. And so we both went and did the research and looked at, analyzed thousands of peer-reviewed articles, looked at hundreds of blogs, talked to our peers and gathered up all the reasons for the failures and also established the failure baseline, which turns out to be 80% plus, right?
Which
80%
is no different to technology projects, really.
to IT projects now.
Oh,
Yeah, it's very
yeah,
similar.
yeah, it's a huge number, and people don't realize when they walk into this space, you're talking 80 plus failure rates, and you need to just bunker down your expectations, slow down, don't rush into these projects because that's just setting up for a path of failure, really.
Absolutely. And what we discovered from all that research was not just that it's 80%. I'll unpack that 80% because we weren't happy with that number. We thought that's just too broad brush. Not all companies are the same. Can we say something a bit more differentiated about that? And we do in the book. But what we did is we discovered these like dozens and dozens, over 100 reasons for why these projects fail. And we decided, well, if we just list all these reasons, a reader's just going to go, well, where do I start? That's not
Yeah,
helpful at
it's
all.
very true. It's a very big list.
It is. And so how do
Yeah.
we cut it down and make it more manageable? So we did a bit of the 80-20 rule, focused on the major reasons why things fail. And then we added stories to everything. So we went
Okay.
out to our network and we gathered stories. We want to contextualize the whole failure set of reasons by showing people what does this failure look like in an actual organization? What actually happened here? What's an example of this? And so we tell lots and lots of stories that we had to anonymize from our network. We couldn't actually reveal any names just because as much as everyone loves to lend their name to a success, very
Yeah,
few
they don't
people.
like to. Yeah, they don't like to put their hand up. Most people don't. We've been fortunate if people on our podcast come on and share their failures for the betterment of our listeners. But it's few and far between that really want to share that. It's difficult.
No, it's a challenge. And so we've got all these stories through about the failures and what we discover as part of this process is that the failure, 80% failure rate is not what you think it is. What it turns out to be is there's a real distinction between organizations that, let's say on the one end of the spectrum are what we call analytically mature, they know what they're doing, and on the other end of the spectrum are analytically immature. And this is a long spectrum. It's not just you're one or the other. There's lots of different things you do to get between those two different things. And what we found is the analytically immature actually don't fail at 80%. They fail at 90 plus. And they're the
Yeah,
majority of
that's
companies out
fair.
there.
That's fair. Yeah, that's probably 80% of companies out there, right?
It is roughly,
If you take the 80-20 rule.
exactly, it's about 70
Yeah.
to 80%. We got an estimate of that. Of the analytically mature companies, which is about 25%, they typically fail at about a 40% failure rate. And that's how you get
Then
your
the goal
80%
should be
overall.
a bit more mature there.
Yeah, yeah.
That should be your first goal. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's there's nothing magical with that. Like it's really bringing good processes, not reacting to the hype. It's having leadership that want to deliver AI projects and make decisions based on data, not just on what the color of the sky is that morning when they woke up. And it's about having the right tools in place, having the right people, having, all the things that you know you should have and that you won't have if you're just reacting to the hype. If you've just woken up today and read this AI headline and told your team we need AI, you're not going to have any of this stuff in place.
And it requires some strategy and thinking and spending months on
Exactly.
unpacking that. Where do we invest? Because we've had those conversations with CEOs of businesses that say, "Oh, we need to do some AI." I go, "Yeah, that's well and good, but where's the problem?" You have to go back to what the problem you're trying to solve with, not just let's bring on a piece of technology and hope for the best, because that's where you end up in that 90+% and that immature perspective of just taking on something that you're really not well versed in or don't know how to manage.
Exactly. And that was the number one reason why data science projects fails was people just not having a real problem to tackle, like not aligned with the strategy, that kind of just picking anything and doing something. That was the number one reason why they fail.
Yeah, we just got to get back to basics. People say it all the time, what problem are you trying to solve? I know it's boring, but the reality is there needs to be some challenge in the way that you're trying to unpack and evolve and make better for everyone in the organization, for customers, whatever it might be. So yeah, that's always the first thing that we need to take along. Very interesting book. I'll go and read that book. I like to listen to books. Any chance there's an Audible out there?
Yeah, so the Audible's coming out soon. So we've just
Oh,
signed.
cool.
It just
Yeah,
got launched about a week and a bit ago. So it was just
yeah,
launched, not even 10, yeah, just a bit over 10 days ago, less than 2 weeks. And so they've
nice.
just kicked off the Audible side of it, but I'm sure we can
Yeah,
provide a link to the
yeah.
listeners for those who want a physical copy, and an Audible one will be coming out soon.
But if you look at data science, there's a lot of learning in that particular area because data science, technology projects, anything, they're all very similar. And I think what you found in terms of maturity would hit the mark with some of the clients we work with that are probably a little bit overawed when trying to manage technology projects when they're not technology people, they're non-technical, and trying to work with technical people. And that's a similar problem that they face. And they have the right support from the teams and people around them, and they're setting yourself up to significant failure. So that's not uncommon in any project. There could be quite a bit of learning in there that I might unpack and talk about a little bit on the podcast as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, one of the things that does differentiate data science projects from normal IT or software projects is the first is you do have a lot of advanced maths in there, right? And that's not necessarily a
Mm.
skill that the software team will have. You
They don't
can
want to
get
have it. No, it's yeah, it's unique skill and it's a costly skill too. It's a
exactly right, and it's not something that everyone's got. So you've got some advanced maths. IT projects have change management, but data science typically have a lot more because you're automating someone's job now. You're really trying to lean in to the people side. Some IT projects, sure, they will automate aspects of work, but these ones here, their goal really is heavily to do that at scale. That's where an AI project adds value. It's at scale, delivering automation and better decision making. And so that's also a massive challenge. And finally, the biggest challenge that we're seeing on the AI and data science side that IT projects don't always have is incredible hype. Like in IT projects, you're probably not suffering. In
there's
software
no hype.
projects,
Yeah,
yeah, it's just
yeah,
business as usual.
yeah. It's very true. And the hype is just because I think it's more of fear of missing out. It is where the hype is coming from right now. What could we be doing? We're falling behind. Um, I think just start small. Just use some of the technology that exists. Get your people to understand it better. Build that maturity, like you just said, in terms of your business and your people, and then opportunities will open up as people know what to actually look for. That's probably the area that, like any IT project, it's a similar thing. We just got to spend some time learning the technology that's around us and evolving with it.
It's so true. And that's one of the biggest questions I get from people. How do I go from zero to one, so to speak? How do I go from no AI to AI? And
Mm.
unfortunately, there isn't a silver bullet that can just launch you. I mean, you can take a risk and launch a big AI project, but your chances of failure are probably well over 90%. If you want to start doing AI, it's exactly what you said. It's why don't we go get look at some data somewhere in the business? And usually all businesses have data in the finance space. If you don't have any finance data, you've got a bigger problem. Forget
What
AI
data
for
does it
now.
have? Yeah, yeah, correct.
If your finance data is a mess, whoa, okay, stop.
Yeah.
We need a different conversation. But if it's not, and hopefully it isn't, you've got some finance data, just start there. And what you can do with
Mm.
that finance data, start building yourself some dashboards, get a view over the past of the business, try and organize that data so that you've got it in a way that you can help make decisions. And that'll give you an intuition for data and how to work with it. And then once you've got that data and then got some dashboards, hopefully, the next step is start asking some questions about the future. So what could we do? How do we plan the next 3 to 6 months? And what that'll require is for you to forecast out revenues and cash flows and profit and things like that. And that'll then invariably require some analytical tools and begin with some really basic stuff like moving averages or some
Mhm.
types of averages that you could understand. And from there, you can start building that maturity step by step. Once you've mastered each step, it won't be fast. You won't have it tomorrow,
No.
but at least when you do deliver it, you'll deliver it with confidence.
And I think the point of it is not to be fast because that's where failure rates are a lot higher. And it goes back to your innovation piece. But what you just said there is around that innovation tool piece, that's just doing little tests that you can prove some momentum, get some value, and then evolve from there. It's not just go bang, let's do something that's big and we don't understand, which is going to need significant investment, and then your chance of failure is up the top end of town. Mm.
Yeah, exactly. So it's,
Yeah.
you can take that risk if you have to, if it's a business imperative, go for it, but just bear that in mind that you're probably going to lose a lot of money and it probably won't work. If if you're noticing this trend and you think the AI trend's here to stay, then all I'd recommend is start on that journey to slowly building your confidence and capability within the organization to leverage data, because that's kind of what underpins it.
That makes sense of it. Just my last sort of question is to you. You come from a very technical background. You're now in manager director of recruitment marketplace. What gets you up in the morning? What excites you at the moment? Is it still the tech, or is it just you've turned into more commercial, from what I understand?
What I really enjoy in the current business is a global focus, very much so. Like as mentioned, most of my business is overseas. I think over only 2% of our business do we do in Australia. It's a tiny, tiny
Okay.
percentage. It's
How
very
do you
little.
manage that from Australia? Obviously, online's easy, but you travel quite a bit,
A lot of
or how does it
travel.
work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got back this weekend from 2 weeks in Saudi Arabia at a global AI summit where we actually did a book launch. And in 2 weeks' time, I'll be in Papua New Guinea for a week. And then after that, I'll be in Malaysia and Singapore. So traveling about a third of the year, I'm probably out of the
Wow.
country. But it's something I really enjoy. I really enjoy this exposure to other cultures. I really, really enjoy breaking down prejudices and barriers, in particular in myself. Before I ever traveled to Saudi Arabia, probably like a lot of people, I just would have misunderstood the country. But after
Mm.
having been there now over the last 18 months and seeing the beautiful nature of those people, they're so hospitable and generous, they're so lovely. And what they're represented as in the media is so wrong and so far from the truth. It's just
Fascinating.
wonderful to get that kind of experience. Actually, the world's a very different place if you switch off the news channels and you go out there and actually,
Don't look at the news. The news
yeah,
is just whatever's wrong in the world. There's no positive at all.
exactly.
Yeah, we can always find wrong. But anyway, yeah, stay
Exactly.
away from that.
So that's been wonderful. Just seeing so much of the world, being exposed to it as part of the job, and helping understand other cultures and breaking down that stuff. And for me, that really restores a level of humanity in the world. It's like, oh no, it isn't so scary and bad over there. Actually, if we all get up and get out of our seat and put some effort into getting to know the other side, you'll realize that
Mm.
there's just a lot of amazing people out there.
Brilliant. Thank you for coming on today and joining us on DevReady podcast. Unpacked quite a few different things in there, and I think we could distill into one sort of topic next time you get you on, because I'd love to get you on again and dig in on specifics. But really appreciate you coming on, and good luck with the new role and driving that out and all the travel in between. So thanks for joining us on the DevReady podcast.
Absolutely. Honestly, it's an absolute pleasure, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Cheers, Evan.